Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Stacey Chazin. How are you today, Stacey?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Desiree. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I am so excited for our conversation. And Stacey, you are the founder. You launched iFactor Leadership Coaching. You are a self-described proud introvert. And I love this. I shared before we began. I thought that was such a cute way to describe yourself, a proud introvert. And so you're going to be talking about leadership development, how that kind of intersection of understanding our traits, maybe our introversion, and how this really can be a strength of ours. And so again, Stacey, welcome. Can you tell us how this journey happened for you? How did you decide to launch iFactor Leadership Coaching and become a leadership coach?
Yes, I would love to. And I've told this story a number of times, and the more I tell it, the farther back I realize it needs to go. And I'm at the point where truly I feel like it started when I was in preschool. And I say that because from the time we're really young, from the time we begin socializing with others in whatever way that looks like, we hear, and maybe our parents even hear from our teachers, that being more social, having more friends, wanting to take part in all aspects of circle time is better than playing off by yourself or having just one or two friends and doing a puzzle with another child. And and this is a message that continues throughout our education, throughout our secondary, post-secondary, and even into our careers, this message that being more outgoing, having more friends, wanting to socialize with others for longer periods of time is somehow better than the alternative. And for me, I realized as I was going through this journey, and I'll share some aha moments I had, what I looked back and realized that for most of my life, I had been feeling badly about the fact that I was a reader. Like I didn't play team sports. I was happy not going out on a Saturday night, and I prefer to have fewer friends than a large friend group. And I realized how many years, decades I had spent feeling badly about that and trying to be the opposite, right? Hearing that I'll be more successful, I'll be happier, I'll be something better. I was more like those other people. And as often happens with any personality trait, I believe, when we try to be something we're not, when we pretend and lean in the opposite direction, it rarely is successful. And even if we achieve some tangible goal, we're not going to be happy and it's not going to be, in all likelihood, sustainable. And I was working for a number of years in the health policy and public health world, which I still do. I still do some consulting there. And I had an opportunity with one of my employers where the whole staff had the opportunity to complete a Myers-Briggs Type Indicator assessment, or MBTI, which for your listeners who might not know, it's the world's most commonly used personality assessment. And it basically gives you insights into how each person is wired. That's a really simple way of saying it. And one of the dimensions in Myers-Briggs is whether you have a preference for introversion or a preference for extroversion. And that really speaks to how you get your energy from the world. So introverts like me, we're more fueled by time spent alone or in small groups when we have opportunities to recharge, a number of other characteristics. And when I got my Myers-Briggs report and I saw that I was my first letter, I thought, like that makes sense. And it, of course, with assessments like that, it's not about your limitations. We learned how is your introversion, and the extroverts learned this about themselves. How is this a gift? What does that mean for how you best operate? And it started to give me insights not only to myself, but I saw people, colleagues who had the four opposite letters than I had. I'm an ISTJ, so the opposite to that is ENFP. And I thought, that's why you drive me crazy, right? Because we approach things completely differently. And what I learned too is that that's good, right? That you don't want a whole team or a whole company, a whole organization, the same letters, the same preferences. But the beauty is really in the alphabet soup. You want that mix of letters so that you can have creatives, you can have logical thinkers, all the different things that you need. So I continued in this role and I had the opportunity to create with some of my colleagues a leadership program for state health leaders. So people who were in director roles at state Medicaid agencies. And I kind of got bit by the leadership bug. And I saw these folks went through similar assessments, and the program was really looking at, and I learned this from a leadership coach involved in it at the time. How do you identify your gifts, your strengths, and use those to be at your best? And I became kind of a leadership junkie and decided to go back to school and get another master's degree. I got a master's in organizational development and leadership from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and went on to get certified in Myers-Briggs. And the when I looked back on my master's program, the thread that ran through the whole program that I realized in retrospect was this notion of leading from a place of self-awareness. So recognizing who you are as a leader, right? Your strengths and your challenges, also being aware of what others bring to the table and what their challenges are, but that that the magic, that key is really just in recognizing how you're wired, what you're made of. And I started blogging about it. I started blogging about my introversion and these epiphanies that I had had while I was in school and after that as well, that when I stopped trying to pretend to be something I wasn't, I was a whole lot happier and a lot more successful in whatever I was doing. So I started blogging about it and I I heard from people who said they felt like they were seen, right? That they had been feeling the same way, and how did I know? And it just really it was really meaningful to me that I was having that impact. I had never written like that before. And I realized like this is what I'm meant to be doing. And that's when I decided to go back and get certified in Myers-Briggs. And now I work with introverted professionals and help them to identify what's called their positive core. So the framework I use is called appreciative coaching. And the idea is helping people figure out what are your true gifts, the things that make you up, that have been in play when you've been most successful, when you've been happiest, when you felt like you've had the greatest impact. Identify some common themes through across those experiences, and then identify some dream future for yourself in your professional world and design a plan for getting there that taps into your positive core. So that was more than a nutshell, but in a nutshell, that's my story and that's how I got here.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing that with us. And I love what you said, alphabet soup. That really stuck out for me because it just makes me think and realize that we are all so much better when we have that variety. We have people who are different than us and bring different things to the table. We are so much more successful, I think, because we're
Yes.
looking at things from all the different angles. And when you can play to the strengths of the different people who are bringing that forward, it's going to just be an even bigger success, whatever you might be working on,
Mhm.
because of those different perspectives, right? So I think that's fabulous. I love it. And the point that you were touching on about growing up and this idea that to be extroverted, to be outgoing is better. And really, for the people who are not, it's not better. It doesn't feel better. That's just not how we are wired to be. And trying to force yourself into, a square spot when you are round, it's just not going to happen. And so I think that when we can look at ourselves, understand ourselves, and then look at our strengths and how we can bring those forward to become more successful is fantastic.
Mhm.
So the work you're doing, bravo, good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit more detail on the Myers-Briggs
Yes.
type. And you mentioned there are four different kind of quadrants, and we all have bits of each. It's just the amount in each of the quadrants. Yes.
Yes. It's essentially so Myers-Briggs, it's an assessment that you take, And it gives you different situations and asks you what your preferences are in a way to figure out what your combined preferences are along 4 dimensions. So one is introvert or extrovert. So as I mentioned, that's how you get energy from the world. The next is whether you are sensing or intuitive, right? So when you're taking in information, what does that look like? Are you looking at themes across and relationships across items, or are you more factually based? The next is whether you're thinking or judging. So that's decision making. And then the final one is judging or perceiving. And that's basically how you go about tackling a task. So, for example, if you're judging, it means that you're more likely you like a plan. So you have a party coming up next weekend that you're having. How are you going to get ready for it? Monday, I'm going to buy my paper goods. Tuesday, I'm going to buy the food, et cetera, et cetera. Or perceiving, which is I'm going to get it all done this week. I know I need to figure out what we're going to eat, and I'll wait to see what the weather's going to be. And it's much more of a spontaneous approach. And I think it goes back when you were talking about a square peg. Like that's a great example. So if you're someone who is has a preference for judging, so you like that structure when you're planning for something, you say, "Hey, I'm going to try to be a little looser this time around and be a little more spontaneous." I know if I did that because I'm a judging, I have a preference for judging rather than perceiving, I would be so stressed out, right? And it wouldn't work. Like the party would not be as good as it would be if I planned it out the way in a way that's aligned with my preference.
Thank
So,
you for going into that depth so we understand the different parts. So you were going to say, I think, we were talking before about how when we look at these different things that we are kind of aligning with, how can we bring those strengths forward to really take us in the direction we want to go, to be more
yep.
successful or become effective leaders, really?
Yeah. And so the idea, so starting with a Myers-Briggs assessment is a great way to do it. Right. So you actually you get a report, and you can see what the various strengths are and gifts are associated with each of the preferences. What you also learn through that process is the intersectionality. So as I said, I'm an ISTJ. So the way those letters are going to interact with one another, even though, so I'm an ISTJ, someone could be an INTJ, and their introversion or their thinking and their judging might show up differently than mine do because I'm sensing versus intuitive. And so it's really understanding, and you can work with a Myers-Briggs professional like me or anybody to do that and get that sense. But to me, when I work with my coaching clients, that's such an important first part is to say, okay, here's what makes you up. Here's how you're wired. Do you think does this sound like you? So one of the things I learned when I went through the Myers-Briggs certification is this is different than it was, I believe, when I took it 10 or 12 years ago, is that you're no longer told, here are your letters. You sit down with a practitioner and you actually decide with the practitioner what your letters are. So you go through it. The practitioner will say, okay, here's how an introvert would typically act in these situations. Here's how an extrovert would typically act. Which one do you identify with more? And you might say you would pick which one is you. But if that is at odds with what your report said, what you picked is the real one, right? It's called a best fit report. So it could be that maybe how you answered the questions, maybe you were in a different frame of mind that day, but you really have the final say on what your letters are. So you have that report, and then there are all these implications for what it means for how you can best communicate, how you can work on teams, how you can lead. So to the extent that as an introvert or anyone really can be mindful of, okay, here are my gifts, here are my strengths, how can I tap into those? And what do I need to be mindful of when I'm leading, when I'm communicating, when I'm networking, for example? And it's trying to just keep that list of gifts and strengths top of mind for yourself.
Yeah, good point. And that is interesting that you sort of discuss the results of taking this test, if you will,
Yeah,
and kind of coming to a true answer in that it's not just maybe what you selected during the questioning period, but how does that feel? Does that feel like it's really true for you? So
right,
that's a
right.
really interesting difference because I as well had taken this test quite a number of years ago. So that's new information for me as well. But so how can, if you're registering and thinking that you're introverted, How would you take this information and begin to use it in a way that, and you shared about keeping these things top of mind, but is there anything in particular that you want to share on how that can help introverted employees or leaders in organizations?
Yeah, great question. So I can answer that from a few different angles. One is I think it's so important and so valuable for people to know who they're working with.
Mm.
And so, one other interesting point about Myers Briggs is if you do that through your employer, through an organization, one of the ethical guidelines is you can't be forced to share your report with anybody. Your manager can't have it, the HR department can't have it, your colleagues can't have it without your consent. That being said, to the extent that you can have a conversation with a team about what you need and how you best function, it will be for the benefit of everyone. So as an example, if you are on a new team or a new group project with a bunch of people, I love the exercise of the first time you come together, sitting around the table or sitting around the Zoom screen, and everyone going around and saying, responding to a prompt like, share with the group one thing you need to be most successful on this project. Or what's one thing you want the group to know about what you need to be to work at your best. And if you're introverted, something like that will come up, right? Like I need to have, for example, an introvert might say, I like to have time to process when a question is being asked. So one big difference between introverts and extroverts is extroverts, we say, like to think out loud, where introverts process more. And so the extroverts might be thinking out loud, talking through an idea, whereas introverts are more likely to come up with their best ideas when they've had time to think about it or also when they've had time to when they have the opportunity to respond in writing. That's another way to do it. An introvert to be successful in a meeting, to make sure their voices are heard in a meeting, for example, it's helpful to have the agenda in advance. Really, for anyone, I'd say that. But for introverts, especially, you take a look at the agenda and try to identify what are 3 points, what's one point I want to make relative to each of the items we're talking about today. And that also gives you time to get any data that you want to get, any evidence, any information to support your case. And that's something else that's very typical of introverts. So, all of that is to say, letting other people know what you need to thrive so that they can do their best to give you what you need. I think that other ways of being successful as an introvert, tapping into your preference and your strength for going deep. And I say that when it comes to both subject matter areas and people. Introverts tend to have deeper subject matter expertise rather than broader, which is more typical of extroverts. So, to the extent that you can demonstrate to others that you have this expertise to show that here's where you're going to thrive when I have the opportunity to be a specialist in some areas. So, that's in content. And then in terms of relationships with other people as well. So, introverts, one of the myths I like to debunk is that we're not social, that we don't like people, right? We do. It's just that we do better when we're socially with either one other person or a smaller group. So, to the extent that you can forge relationships with people with whom you work, whether it's your manager or people you manage or peers through whether it's a coffee or a lunch, and you can do that on Zoom as well, to be able to tap into that depth of relationship where you get to know fewer people or maybe the same number of people just over a longer period of time. I recommend that. So it's really the common thread of it all is being as open as you can to let other people know this is who you are, this is what you need to be successful, and then showing them that when you have those situations, those circumstances are in place, demonstrating what you're able to accomplish and showcasing the leader that you are.
Great stuff. And I think anytime we can all figure out like how we can contribute best to any kind of project, it's going to be a more successful project,
Yes,
right? You're going to have
absolutely.
better results when everybody can be like, this is how I'm going to be approaching it, and or this is what I need to be my best to contribute the most to this. So I think
Right.
that's always good. Understanding ourselves and our strengths and weaknesses is always good because we can be better having
Yep,
known that.
absolutely.
So, if we are talking about in the workplace and you are, say, recognizing yourself as more introverted and you want to advance. It's so often, I know it's hard to speak up. It's hard to maybe kind of brag about yourself, if you will. Any suggestions that you want to share about how introverts can begin to get recognized for the work they're doing if they want promotions,
Yep.
raises, things like that? What are some good ideas or tips you want to share on that?
Yeah, happy to. And again, it's going to go back to tapping into your gifts and strengths as an introvert. Right? So let's take the example of you want a promotion or a raise. So the first thing you want to do that's going to tap into your strengths is we tend to be really good at research, right? And going deep in information. And I want to just let me just pause for a second and just to give you a caveat. When I'm talking about what introverts tend to be good at or what their strengths are, it's very much a tend to. So it's not that every single introvert has all of these characteristics, and there are going to be different times and circumstances when you're going to lean more into some of these and less into others. So it's not an always and an every person. Want to make that point. But that being said, we tend to thrive and enjoy going deep with research and preparing. So, what that means is, as an introvert, do your research. Find out if you're asking for a raise or if you're asking for a promotion, find out what other people in your job market at your level, what are they making? What types of experiences, what tenure, what types of experiences are people who have that next title up that you're looking for? How do their experiences compare to what you have? So you're going to do your research. That's the first thing. The next thing in terms of preparation is being really specific about what your goals are for the negotiation, for the ask. And I like to advise what's your ideal? You know, let's say it's a dollar amount, or let's say it's you want to get promoted by a certain day. What's your ideal? And then what are you willing to take? Right? What's the minimum that you're willing to accept? So to be really clear in your mind what that looks like before you go in. The next thing is you want to build the case for your promotion or for your ask. And similarly, tapping into your strengths, that's going to be collecting data over the course of the year, the 6 months, whatever it is, to show what impact you've had on your team, on your organization. And what I recommend is start to do this before well in advance of when you're going to make your ask. Because if you wait until a position opens up or you realize that you want to be making more money, and you don't want to be trying to collect, all right, where can I find all those emails that where people said I did a great job or someone mentioned the impact that I had or I realized the impact I'd had. You want to keep a file, whether it's electronic or whatever works for you. I like to do an email folder, right? And you could call it something like proof that I'm great or great, awesome emails I got from other people and save it there. So when you go to look back, you have all that handy and you're not scrambling to pull all of that together. Definitely use the pen, the keyboard when you're to the extent that you can in advance of a meeting. Be clear about what you're going to be asking for. It might be more comfortable for you to put that in writing and then have the conversation about it. That works for a lot of people. And this is I guess a softer one, but self-care is really important for introverts during negotiations because it does push us outside of our comfort zone, right? A lot of introverts are not comfortable with conflict. And you're putting yourself out there. You're hopefully being a little assertive and it could really drain you. And if you're not taking care of yourself in terms of maybe it's after a meeting with your boss, you've blocked an hour where that's going to be your recovery time, or you go for a walk, you practice yoga, you meditate, you journal. I love journaling as a way to protect your energy level and prevent stress. So that's a really good one. And I think finally for introverts, looking back on the process when it's done, what worked for you, right? What would you have done differently next time? Because you're always going to be negotiating for something. And if I might just put a quick plug in, I have an ebook that's coming out in the next few weeks called Winning Negotiations, the Introvert's Playbook to Getting What You Want. And it has a bunch more strategies in there and some worksheets as well for introverts who want to put these practices into play and see how they work for them.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Stacey. That's awesome. And great tips for sure. I love the idea of keeping kind of that email folder of all
Yep.
the good things that you've gotten feedback on and keeping track of all of the things that you're doing that are moving the needle, if you will, in your job, in the company or whatever, because using that as proof, like, here are the things that I have had my hand in accomplishing, and this is why I deserve a raise,
Yep.
or a promotion or whatever. And I've
Yep.
had a guest on before who very specifically indicated that that's what she does and recommends all the time, keeping track of the things that you are successfully a part of and growing the company, your business, whatever.
Yes.
And yeah, so great suggestions. And of course, that idea of, the self care, taking the time after the fact, because it can be very stressful when you're coming into something like this. If it's not in your nature to have to feel confrontational, even though it's not necessarily a confrontation, it kind of feels that way. And yeah, this is a great idea. Journaling, walking, taking some time to just process through
Yeah.
everything that just happened is a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. And so this kind of actually leads back to something I wanted to ask you, and that was if you are looking for a job, if you're job hunting, or perhaps you're going out on interviews as an introvert, what are maybe some tips or things that you can suggest that would help in that process for somebody who's that introverted aspect?
Right. Great question. So you can go about that a few ways. One is when you're searching for the job itself, to be alert for jobs that are going to give you opportunities to lean into your introversion. And I want to say, I don't mean, I think most jobs can be done by anyone, right? With the exception of maybe a front desk receptionist probably is probably not the best job for an introvert. But I think any job that you find, to be looking in the job description and probing when you hopefully initially get an interview to see what is the culture like when it comes to, let's say, protecting energy. Meaning, I are there any guidelines around back-to-back meetings? Do you have opportunities to work virtually for at least part of the week? What are expectations around collaboration? And you certainly don't wanna say, "Oh, well, I'm not a collaborator." That's not something that you wanna be putting out there, but to make sure that there are gonna be pieces in place that are gonna allow you to be your best self and maintain your energy in a job. I also recommend when you're writing a cover letter or crafting your resume to highlight your introverted gifts in those materials. And you don't need to say, as an introvert, I blah, 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 but to talk about whatever it is for you, whether you're an excellent writer or your expertise in going deep in different subject matter areas. But I love if you can make connections in your resume to ways that you've used your introversion to achieve impact in different ways, right? So the advice we hear is that your resume shouldn't be a recounting of tasks you've done, but more about the impact that you've had. And so, to the extent that you can tie that impact to your introverted strengths, I think will work in your favor. The other thing, I read this crazy statistic the other day. I think, oh, I want to find it. So I believe it's 80% of decisions made at a first interview for the decision to advance to the next round of interview is based in the likability of the candidate in that very first, the extent to which the interviewers feel a personal connection to the interviewee. And that can put introverts at a disadvantage because it takes us a little longer to warm up. And so, what I would recommend is, to the extent to which you can get to know your interviewers ahead of time over LinkedIn, over doing a search to see if they've written on different topics, find out what you can about them online so that it sets you up in the best way possible to make those connections that are a little harder and to follow up immediately with an email, kind of calling out the personal or being really specific about the connection that you felt to each of the people, right? I felt like we connected, related to the need for improved access to care or whatever it is you're talking about. I think that can really help you there.
Great idea, Stacey. Thank you for sharing those. And the point that you made about doing a little bit of research into who it is that you might be meeting with, I think is a great way to develop that kind of feeling as if you know this person. There is that connection. Maybe you do have some
Mhm.
similar hobbies if it's listed in their LinkedIn profile or whatever, and making that connection
Yep.
between something that you're interested in and they're interested in can make a difference in how you come across in an interview because
Yeah.
it's a little bit more familiarity than meeting somebody for the very first time and you know nothing about them.
Absolutely. And it's also all of it is harder when you're over Zoom, when it's a
Mhm.
virtual interview, because introverts tend to excel when we pick up on body language and nonverbal cues, and that's harder to do virtually.
Yeah.
So we miss out on that competitive advantage we have there when you're not actually in a room with someone.
Yeah, that's another good point. So any kind of advantage that we can have by being
Yeah,
prepared in advance is going to be helpful. Yeah,
absolutely.
love it. Okay, so let's see, where do I want to go from here? Okay, you shared with me that you're going to be beginning a self-paced learning group coming up soon. Do you want to share a little bit more about
Yeah,
that?
so
Like when it's going to be starting?
it's gonna be opening toward the end of October. So I don't know how that's gonna align with when this episode comes out, but it'll be opening probably on a quarterly basis. Folks will have an opportunity, if not in time for this episode, certainly the next one. And you can get updated information on it at my website, which is ifactorleadership.com. The course is called the Introverts Leadership Formula, and it's going to focus on three key areas of leadership for introverts. One is I'm calling it unlock your voice to unleash your power. So it's all focused on powerful communication techniques, including delivering powerful presentations, which is I've been asked on interviews recently, how come introverts don't like to present? And I said they actually do. Introverts are really well wired to be presenters. Right. Like we're up on stage, no one can make small talk with us. We're able to prepare ahead of time, all these great things. Focusing on communication, telling your and part of that is crafting your own leadership story, which is how can you craft a narrative that lets people know who you are as a leader that includes an emphasis on your introversion, which is a fun thing to do. The second piece of it is focusing on preventing introvert burnout. Most workplaces, it might not surprise you, are really designed with extroverts in mind, right? There's open offices, there's back to back meetings, there's you need to network, you need to collaborate, all these things. And it's really easy for introverts to get burnt out. And so I teach how you can recognize the signs and symptoms of burnout, which can be physical, psychological, behavioral, and then strategies you can use to prevent burnout so it's not affecting you because there are really serious health risks from it, not to mention how it impacts your career, that you're not able to show up as your best. And then my favorite module, well, gosh, I guess I don't know if it's my favorite. I like all three. Is really like a little bit of what you and I talked about before. How do you make an ask? I call it claiming your seat at the table. So how do you make your ask for a promotion, a raise, a more flexible work schedule? And I talk about how can you strategically build your network? How can you network in ways that aren't going to drain you? How can you make an elevator pitch for your promotion? And then how can you make it happen? How can you make those asks in ways that decision makers have a really hard time saying no? So
Oh,
it's a self-paced digital course, and then there are live sessions a couple times a month for students to get advice from me and also to connect with other introverts who are going through it. So I'm really excited about it.
yeah, that's fantastic, Stacey. I'm so excited for you for that and for the listeners and anybody who's interested in joining. I'll detail the information in the show notes, and your episode will be airing into the quarter. So we'll be on beyond our in real time. So it'll probably be the next round.
Right.
But still, what a great opportunity for people to get in and learn and discover and find out ways to really highlight their strengths and just be better
Yeah.
and contribute more and be healthy and do it in a way that aligns with their style and strengths. So that's good stuff. Okay, so I always love to ask my guests if there are books that they think are influential and maybe in your life or beneficial that you want to share with the listeners. Do you have some that you want to share with us?
I do. This is a book by the author Susan Cain. People may have heard of her. She has a famous TED Talk she did on introversion. And if you search up Susan Cain and introvert, it'll pop right up. I highly recommend people watch that. It's really inspiring. That talks about her introverted journey. And this is a book that came out a few years ago that she wrote called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. It talks about a lot. It talks about our gifts. It talks about what it means to be out in the world as an introvert and how we can thrive in that space. So it's always I love reading something like this where I feel like it's a window to my soul. And I think that other introverts might feel the same way.
Good recommendation. And I'll include the information in the show notes for that. And then how about any podcasts? Do you enjoy listening to podcasts that you think that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Oh, good question. So there's a podcast I like called the Quiet and Strong podcast by David Hall. I also, oh, what do I listen to? I like to listen to Mel Robbins has a great
Mm.
podcast, right? And I find even though she's not an introvert, or maybe she is an introvert, I don't know, but I find her really inspiring. And I think a lot of what she talks about, she has this one episode that came out, gosh, I think it was last summer. And it was basically about imposter syndrome, which is something I've written about. I don't know if you heard the episode. It turned out it was I think it was one of her most listened to episodes, and I draw from what she talks about a lot, even though it's not specific to introverts. So I think it's just called the Mel Robbins podcast.
Yeah, great recommendations. I love her show. I listen to it all the time. I think I've shared it with every one of my family members, depending on the episode,
Yeah.
because she is fantastic. But thank you for the other recommendation as well. And I'll
Yeah.
include that for the listeners to check out. So that's awesome. Stacey, is there anything that you want to share with the listeners, the person who's listening right now, that we haven't talked about so far, but that you think they really should know?
Well, I guess it's driving home a point, and that's lean into who you are. Don't try to pretend to be something you're not. And if you're an introvert listening to this podcast, I just want to say to you, you are more than okay. Don't pretend to be something you're not. And there are others out here, right? About half the population is introverted. And there are ways that you can be just as successful, you can get just as much recognition for your contributions, for your leadership. And you can achieve those things in ways that stay true to who you are.
Yeah, love it. Excellent. Well, Stacey, would you please share with the listeners how they can find you, the work that you're doing, if they want to follow along, or maybe reach out and pick your brain on stuff? How can they do that?
Yep. So go to my website, which is ifactorleadership.com. The I factor is what makes us great as introverts. You can click on there's a tab there you can learn about working with me as a coach. If you go to ifactorgift.com, I have a cool new resource that you can download for free and all kinds of other cool tools there. I have a daily productivity hacks for introverts. So how can you get more done with less stress? You can find that on my website as well. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So I factor leadership. So please come check me out. I would love to talk with you and hear about your introverted leadership journey and where you want to go.
Excellent. I will for sure include all that information in the show notes to make it super easy for the listeners to find you. Stacey, again, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this with us. I think it has just been tremendous, and you've given us some great tools and tips and things to think about. Thank you.
My pleasure, Desiree. It was great to speak with you. Have a great
All right.
day.
Thank you. We'll talk more soon. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.